It is a NAIDOC week this week. National NAIDOC Week celebrations are held across Australia in the first week of July every year. And it's all about celebrating and recognising and embracing the history and the culture and the achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Over 7 days, an opportunity for all Australians during NAIDOC Week to learn about First Nations cultures and histories and participate in celebrations of the oldest continuous living culture on Earth. And I went along to a really fascinating event here in Toowoomba yesterday, down at the Lighthouse. And I've talked about the Lighthouse quite a few times on the program in the past. The Lighthouse is on the corner of Margaret and Hume Streets, and they do some fantastic stuff. But yesterday in the Wright Gallery, there was an information session on the Battle of Meewah. Now, most people know, even though it hasn't been officially changed over by Toowoomba Regional Council or the powers that be, but most people know that when we refer to Meewah, it's the Indigenous name for tabletop. The hill, probably one of the most photographed geographical features on the local landscape out of any of them. But the Battle of Meewah, shared history and truth-telling, being an ally. It was yesterday at the Lighthouse, and got to hear a little bit more about this incredible battle. Used to be known as the Battle of One Tree Hill, and it raised the question, why isn't this more widely known? Why isn't this epic story and the heroic nature of the defence of their country by the Indigenous people, why isn't that a story that is shared more often in schools? Why isn't it taught to us? Why didn't we know more about who Multuggerah was, even when the viaduct on the Second Range crossing, going back 4 or 5 years ago now, was named the Multuggerah Viaduct, and yet even after that, very few people really know who Multuggerah was or what his legacy is. It was an interesting discussion to have with Amy Cook. Amy is heavily involved in the Friends of Multuggerah and the Friends of Meewah, and I had a chat to her yesterday. Here's some of what we talked about.
Australians born on country, born in this land, are connected. You feel the spirit. People, visitors that come, people that move here know Australia is a special place, and that's because it's been cared for 65,000 years. It's extraordinary, and I think we have so much to learn from those perspectives.
I think it was 2018, 2019, the Second Range crossing was under development, and I had heard of a Friends of Multuggerah group and went along to the service that's at the Lower Tobruk Drive at Picnic Point in September, and went along to that service to learn who Multuggerah was and what the Battle of Meewah was about. Then through uni did a assessment piece that asked about local history and storytelling, and that was in 2021, and that took me back to Multuggerah and thinking to go and learn some more.
Were your studies centred around Indigenous history?
So I'm studying social work, and it was part of a course with Griffith Uni on First Peoples social justice and understanding local histories as part of a foundation course into the degree. Right. So I hadn't ever been asked that question, and that really took me back to the Multuggerah story, where I realised I didn't know much about. I'd gone to the service, and it's similar to like an Anzac service where there's that memorial of the battle and what happened, but that really, I guess, started the journey for me to understand who Multuggerah was as a First Nations man in the 1800s and his relationships and the story that talked about.
Back then, was that information easy to come by?
No, so I definitely started yarning some more with, there were a couple of people involved in Friends of Multuggerah that have been really pivotal in the storytelling and the foundation of Friends of Multuggerah. Dr. Mark Copland, who had an interest in local history, and Joshua Waters were two people through the Social Justice Commission who have led the Friends of Multuggerah group for many years, supporting that space for those conversations. Yep. And then through Dr. Mark Copland and my children were at a local state school, he reached out to see if there was interest in us participating in the service. And yeah, I guess that for me, it was sort of like the perfect bringing together of different elements of who was Multuggerah, why is this story of significance, and in particular the second range crossing, naming a piece of infrastructure after him, and then learnt about Multuggerah as this strong, mighty Aboriginal warrior who protected the country and worked with other tribal alliances to come together and resist some of that settlement in the 1800s. And so going into and understanding who Multuggerah was, that I guess for me sparked that curiosity of why don't we know more about this person? Who is he, and why is this potential role model for our local community, somebody who cared for the country, understood the landscape, was super amazing with his strategic warfare, being recognised and celebrated locally.
I was very involved with the Yes campaign and was devastated. I guess I kind of saw... I was 17 when, in 1967, and was aware of that momentous change. And I just thought, and I was too young to vote, and I thought, I'm going to get the chance to vote this time, and oh God, I'm going to make a difference. And it was devastating when that...
For those who aren't aware, and we'd encourage people to do a bit more research and perhaps read up and find a more detailed version, but can you give me the abridged version of the Battle of One Tree Hill?
Yeah, certainly. Battle of Meewah was held in 1843, 12th of September. So the resistance wars were a campaign from local First Nations clans over 7 years in resisting some of that settlement from Brisbane coming west into the pastoral lands that they proposed were the fertile countries of the Darling Downs. I guess the significance of the Battle of Meewah is that Multuggerah's father, Old Moppy, had been murdered by settlers coming through the country, and he had a relationship with a non-Indigenous local man called Tinker Campbell, and they had been working to understand the local area and coexist in this space. But the death of Old Moppy really concerned Multuggerah and the clans of what was, I guess, like imminent in the move of some of the people coming up from down south. So that event on the 12th of September in 1843, there was no loss of life of the settlers, but Multuggerah strategically placed himself on top of Meewah, which is just to the east of the Toowoomba Escarpment, and used large boulders and rolled them down the hill to wipe out the drays that were trying to pass the range. And it was part of that strategy to deter them from coming through that constantly met that resistance. Ray Kirkove, who is the historian in reference to the Battle of Meewah commemoration that we utilise, he has gone through a lot of the historical records at the time, so the Brisbane Times papers and diary recollections of different people moving through that area, is that Multuggerah was able to work strategically with Yagara, Yugarabul, Turrbal, Jagara coming into this space and using the landscape to their advantage, so putting themselves at the top of Meewah to have that oversight over and seeing the drays come and then move through and create that fear and resistance to settlement. So it's very, very clever.
It's quite a heroic story, really.
Yes.
So once you learnt this story and it became something that you wanted to spread a little bit more further afield and make more well known, you've ended up as a member of the Friends of Meewah, but you've also ended up being as the chair of the group. Were people surprised, or should people have been surprised, to find a whitey, lady of European background, chairing a group, Friends of Meewah, which was essentially an Indigenous motivated group, I guess? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do actually often get that question of curiosity. I think for me, a lot of people assume that First Nations-led stories have no place for non-Indigenous, and my challenge for that is that we always amplify First Nations voices. They've been marginalised for many, many years throughout Australia's history. The opportunity in this conversation is that the burden isn't just First Nations to tell this story. We, as non-Indigenous allies, have a responsibility to participate in truth-telling, and I think that has been part of the story for me in wanting to be involved and share, is that healing doesn't happen one-sided, and so there is opportunity in Multuggerah's story for us to play a role like Tinker Campbell, who worked and lived alongside Multuggerah for many years, and we can be that as well. It's not up to First Nations people to create the change that we want to see. It is up to everyone. Yeah. And so that's where I feel compelled to be active in this community, to want to share the stories and celebrate First Nations culture as something that I have great pride in being part of Australia's history.
Australia was born on country, born in this land, are connected. You feel the spirit. People, visitors that come, people that move here know Australia is a special place, and that's because it's been cared for 65,000 years.
You also said at the meeting this morning that there is a lot of hope in this story. How do you mean by hope? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I think when I first heard Multuggerah's story, I was really overwhelmed with the silence that sits around it. Why don't people know about this? When I asked people about, do you know who Multuggerah is? Could people pronounce Multuggerah? Do you know the Multuggerah story? I felt really surprised that we didn't know about it. And I think that was part of the motivation for me of trying to problem solve. How could we share this more? And the opportunity to, I guess, participate in Battle of Meewah commemoration and host that every year is that children innately are really curious to learn more, and they're really open to having difficult conversations. And it's not always easy, but the story provides hope because Multuggerah was successful with his skirmishes and the resistance. The 12th of September was a huge success. It was written about in the history books for 20 years in the newspapers, referencing the Battle of Meewah as an example of strong Aboriginal representation in their community working together. And the settlers at the time were impressed by his fortitude and courage and strength, and it was written about that, and we don't hear that enough. And so for me, the hope is our children will learn of these stories, strength-based stories of success and celebration, because there's a lot of hurt and trauma that comes from truth-telling and the atrocities that took place. This is a story of a campaign that was successful, led by a First Nations man in a terrain that is not easy. Anyone that's walked through the escarpment, gone through the trails, knows that that's not easy scrub to navigate, and he did it so well that we can share those stories with our kids and be like, that happened here locally. Absolutely. This is really cool.
Yeah. In an era when we're trying to define what a hero is and what a man is, the lengths that he was willing to go to, and the courage and the determination to defend his family, to avenge his father's death, but to defend his people and his land, stepping up instead of stepping back. It has all the hallmarks of what kids should grow up to understand what a man is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Inspired, and the ripple effect of Multuggerah's story is that he didn't work in isolation. He worked with community, with other alliances. He came together. He worked with non-Indigenous community. The women worked to protect the children, gather food, fuel the soldiers. There's so much hope in this story for our generations to come through and have connection to that and tell these truths from our local history here in Toowoomba in a way that we've never spoke to previously, or that I've heard in the time that I've been here.
Amy Cook, she's one of the key organisers of the Battle of Meewah commemoration, which is held each year on the 12th of September up on the Lower Tobruk Drive, up below Picnic Point, overlooking Meewah, formerly known as One Tree Hill.